So I did this. I made this as a little chart to kind of help illustrate this point, where you have the 3 arrows. There is information that your executives care about, so show them that. But don't show them the information that you might be sharing with your HR staff. If you're using, cost per hire per recruiter, well, the CEO doesn't care about that, right? It's your team that cares about that, because you're actually going to start measuring them on their efficiency for it as well. The tools that you can use for metrics managing down in your organization are not the tools you use to manage hiring managers to change their behavior. And as an example of this, this is actually in an article that just came out in IRA magazine. I kind of told this story of a vacancy rate, right, or turnover. It's actually a turnover. In a turnover rate, if you look at a piece of turnover and just show the top line statistic, well, everyone kind of looks at it and says, interesting, but not necessarily actionable. Try reporting turnover by manager. That's actionable. People start changing their behaviors when you actually start ranking it out by that kind of notion. Okay, so that's our first mistake. We're not showing the right things to the right people. Now, sometimes we are showing the right things to the right people, but there is no action about it. That's that's the turnover problem, right? Okay. Now, again, this is where I take us off the hook for exactly 30 seconds, and I put us back on the hook again. This actually comes from a book called Competing on Analytics, which is it's one of my favorites in kind of in the future state. Way better than my book, honestly. It's true. The Competing on Analytics book is really, it's the Bible for business intelligence right now. If you have a CEO that's interested in metrics, I guarantee you that they've read it. And by the way, there is a chapter in that book that's titled HR, and it says, well, we don't know anyone doing this yet, but if we did, ... I'm going, oh man, I can't escape this. So we got to go fix this part in there too. But one thing that's in there as well is he says the following, which is, the leaders that say our people are our most important asset sometimes have no idea what they want. And unrelate, right? I mean, on there as well. So if you don't have a precise idea about what the job requires, how are you going to measure that? How do you build outcomes when you have fuzzy inputs in there? It's kind of difficult. There is a hierarchy of reporting, of business intelligence. And I'm going to go through a couple of lines of this, not everything on it, but I want to kind of give you a gut feel on how to use data to make different things happen, okay? And think of this almost like a Maslow's chart, of kind of just increasing sophistication, where at the very baseline you have questions about just what happened. What happened questions are things like how many jobs closed in a month. It could be an applicant flow log. Notice I put the least glamorous, most boring piece of the piece of reporting that we can do just so we don't get sued. Like, don't get sued stuff, that goes in the what happens column, right? That's a pretty good gut check on there overall. But if you're just looking for some statistics, that's what happened. Not saying that they're bad, because there are ways of using that data actionably. But sometimes as you move up this chain, how many things happened? Did our hiring managers comply with performance evaluations? I know all of your managers fill out their performance evaluations on time, so I know I'm talking to the wrong crowd, right? But just in case, monitoring and acting on the performance evaluation completed is an interesting statistic. One can use that and a bat and go around and make sure that people are filling out their performance evals, right? And as you kind of change up on here, you ask questions like, well, where is the problem? Do we have a problem? Where is it? Where is it located? And you can begin to use statistics for that. And then as you go up, you can even see, well, okay, can I then analyze this data and gain insight? And that really is the key to the work that we're beginning to do in HR business intelligence, which is identifying the problem through data and trying to find insight in how to solve it. Okay? Now this goes all the way up the food chain. And by the way, it's actually on this page beforehand here. This is where a lot of us sit right now. Well, a lot of us are kind of in these first three tiers. This next slide here is aspirational. This is where we can be. I think a lot of the writing that's going on right now in human resources business intelligence is getting to the portions of questions like what will happen next. We've got a lot of healthcare organizations in the room. You have almost certainly had conversations about predicting retirement waves for RNs over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, how can you use your data to do retirement probability analysis? How can you use that for for skill matrices as well? So you can kind of see who should succeed other people inside of the organization. Now, as you look at different types of statistics, and I've kind of broken up statistics into 5 quadrants. How do you attract talent? How do you acquire it? How do you kind of bring them in and manage them? How do you develop that talent, utilize, and then what do you use for separation? On each quadrant, we're not going to drill into all the bullets here, but in each quadrant of this, there are actionable outcomes that you can use. So as an example, if you are measuring employment brand strength, or what the employment brand looks like, there are outputs to that that then should be fed back into the brand new blog that Shannon helped you create or whatever, right? There are things that you should be understanding insight-wise to make some of those changes. Or, you know, what are your top sources of talent? It hasn't been until recently that we were able to measure the time that someone clicks on the job on Monster all the way through to the hire and be able to actually see who you're hiring with some reasonable confidence. You know, that little "how did you hear about us" drop down, it's a mess, right? I mean, it's a tough thing to do. There are techniques to make that more reliable, so you're not depending on, you know, the candidate. Don't depend on them to tell you where they came from. That's the worst thing you can do. But you can figure it out in other ways too. That then becomes actionable intelligence, where that feeds back into the process of recruiting. You know, I think some of the acquisition metrics that we talked about here are interesting. Recruiting efficiency, by the way, is one of my favorites. I worked on this with the staffing.org folks a while ago, where we're literally taking the recruiting function and measuring that like you'd almost measure a headhunter. You take the total, instead of doing a cost per hire, you do a cost for cost of the hire by the aggregate salaries that you recruited for. So that way you actually can you can actually figure out how much of a dollar did you have to spend on recruiting for salary, and that adjusts for, you know, if you're doing executive recruiting versus low-level recruiting as well, and like lower compensation, you actually get a much better measure of what your recruiters are doing and compare them against each other. Don't tell them I said that. Okay. You know, I actually was recently reminded at an Omnicom meeting. Remember, HOTUS is owned by Omnicom. We've got about 300 different shops. One of our companies specializes in educating retail stores on new products, which is kind of cool. So it's a learning development company that goes into retail shops to talk about products and so forth, which is kind of interesting. And they reminded me of a statistic that I hadn't thought of in quite a long time, which is called the Kirkpatrick 4. The Kirkpatrick 4 measures changes that occur during learning and development. So, you know, here's your state before learning and development. You know, the course occurred. Change happens. I administer the course, and then you measure the change from before and after. And in all the meetings that I've ever had with learning and development, we've always struggled with, well, how do I measure, how do I quantify the effort that goes on through learning and development and put a dollar amount to it? The Kirkpatrick 4 actually does it. And that creates true outcomes as well. There are some amazing ways to use these kind of statistics to really change the way that we're operating as companies, optimizing our talent. Okay. Speaking of optimizing, two statistics here that I thought were kind of cool in here. One is, instead of measuring internal mobility, measure high potentials moving within your organization. You know, look at your performance ratings and try to figure out how often you're circulating your highest potential people in the company, and if that is creating greater health. Some of your organizations have that as a policy, right? High potentials can kind of get circulated around your companies, learn different parts of the business, which hopefully is creating stronger businesses overall.